I bet you didn't know just how dramatic the aviation standoff between China and Boeing really was. Welcome back to Universal Insight. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for more updates. Under the cloak of darkness, as city lights flickered in the distance, a silent exodus began to unfold on the sprawling tarmacs of Shanghai and Guangzhou. The air was thick with tension, the usual hum of airport activity replaced by an uneasy stillness. Dozens of brand-new Boeing 737 MAX jets gleaming under the harsh floodlights stood in eerie silence. Once celebrated as marvels of engineering and symbols of global connection, these aircraft now sat idle, unwanted liabilities caught in the crossfire of a deepening trade war between two superpowers. In the dead of night, American pilots, faces set with determination, boarded these empty planes. Their mission was urgent and fraught with risk. Fly the jets back to the United States before Chinese authorities could seize them as bargaining chips in the escalating dispute. Each takeoff was a quiet act of defiance, the jets' navigation lights blinking like beacons as they soared over the South China Sea. With every departure, Boeing left behind what had once been its most promising and lucrative market. For Boeing, this was more than a logistical operation, it was a costly rescue mission. Hundreds of millions of dollars in advanced aircraft were flown home, their empty cabins echoing with the loss of opportunity and trust. The vacant seats, once meant for Chinese travelers and business people, now stood as stark reminders of a fractured relationship. The dramatic airlift, captured by news cameras and splashed across headlines worldwide, was the first public sign of a crisis that had been brewing for months. Diplomatic frost had hardened into outright economic conflict, and the aviation industry was caught in the middle. In Seattle, Boeing executives huddled around glowing screens, tracking the progress of each flight with a mix of relief and dread. Getting the planes out was a logistical victory, but it was a victory born of failure, a desperate move to salvage assets as the company's global ambitions unraveled. The Chinese market, once projected to demand thousands of new jets over the coming decades, had slammed its doors shut. Empty runways and closed gates now stood where bustling activity once promised a bright future. Each departing aircraft marked not just a logistical maneuver, but a severed tie, a deep crack in the very foundation of global trade and cooperation. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. The world watched as these state-of-the-art machines, designed to unite continents and cultures, became unwilling icons of economic decoupling. The promise of seamless global travel was suddenly in jeopardy. The Great Escape was underway, and for the global aviation industry, the turbulence was only just beginning. The skies ahead looked stormy, with uncertainty looming on every horizon. The exodus of Boeing jets from China marked the dramatic climax of a trade war that had been building for months, each side escalating with moves that would reshape the global aviation landscape. It all began when Washington announced sweeping new tariffs, raising duties on Chinese goods to a staggering 145%. The move, intended to shield American manufacturers from foreign competition, sent shockwaves through financial markets and rattled global supply chains. Overnight, the cost of everything from electronics to textiles soared, and the world braced for retaliation. Beijing wasted no time. Within days, Chinese officials unveiled their own countermeasures, a 125% tariff on U.S. aircraft and components. This was a direct hit at Boeing, whose fortunes were closely tied to the booming Chinese aviation market. The message was unmistakable: China would not back down. The next blow came swiftly. China's aviation authority ordered all domestic airlines to suspend new Boeing deliveries indefinitely. For years, Boeing had relied on China as a key growth engine, with hundreds of jets on order. Now that pipeline was frozen and billions of dollars in contracts were suddenly in limbo. Planes that had already arrived in China were stranded on tarmacs, caught in a bureaucratic standoff. As the standoff dragged on, some jets were quietly flown out of the country under cover of darkness, their midnight departures symbolizing the unraveling of a once thriving partnership. But Beijing wasn't finished. Authorities imposed a sweeping ban on the purchase of new U.S. aircraft parts, a move that threatened the daily operations of hundreds of Boeing jets still flying in Chinese fleets. Airlines scrambled to find alternative suppliers, but the sudden shortage of critical components put maintenance schedules and safety checks at risk. The intention behind these measures was clear: make it as difficult and expensive as possible for Chinese airlines to operate American-made planes. Maintenance costs soared, paperwork piled up, and uncertainty gripped the industry. Step by step, China constructed a formidable wall around its aviation sector. By locking Boeing out, Beijing sent a powerful signal to the world. It was ready to defend its interests and accelerate the development of its own homegrown aircraft industry. The ripple effects were immediate, disrupting supply chains that stretched from Seattle to Shenzhen. What began as a trade dispute quickly spiraled into an operational crisis. Airports on both sides of the Pacific saw grounded planes and empty gates, while international news outlets tracked the unfolding aviation standoff. In real time, the world's aviation order was being rewritten. Industry leaders gathered at emergency summits, analysts debated the long-term fallout, and airlines everywhere braced for a new era of uncertainty and competition. Boeing's response was grim, but resolute. Inside the company's headquarters, the mood was tense. Executives gathered in urgent meetings, faces etched with concern as the magnitude of China's decision became clear. CEO Kelly Ortberg stepped before the press, his voice steady but somber. He announced that Boeing would aggressively seek new buyers for the jets originally destined for China, vowing that the company would not allow this crisis to derail its long-term recovery. Ortberg emphasized Boeing's commitment to its workforce and partners, but acknowledged the uncertainty ahead. The loss of China, accounting for a quarter of Boeing's future deliveries, was a devastating blow. Almost immediately, Boeing's stock price plummeted, sending shockwaves through Wall Street. On the factory floor, production lines slowed and workers anxiously awaited news about their jobs. In Beijing, government officials faced the cameras with a mix of defiance and regret. They admitted the economic pain the move would cause, but insisted their actions were a necessary defense against what they described as escalating U.S. aggression. Behind the scenes, Chinese authorities scrambled to prepare financial aid packages for their own struggling airlines and aerospace sector. The financial fallout was immediate and widespread. Boeing's vast network of suppliers, from engine makers to seat manufacturers, suddenly faced a sharp drop in orders. Many small and medium-sized businesses heavily reliant on Boeing contracts braced for impact. Factory floors that once buzzed with activity fell eerily silent. Workers found themselves with little to do as assembly lines slowed or halted altogether. The human cost quickly became apparent. Thousands of American workers received layoff notices, and small businesses near Boeing facilities shuttered their doors. Entire communities, once thriving thanks to aerospace jobs, now faced an uncertain future. Across both the US and China, the trade war was no longer an abstract policy debate. It had become a direct threat to the livelihoods of families, with job fairs crowded by the newly unemployed and households gripped by anxiety. The crisis laid bare the deep interdependence between the US and Chinese economies. Every cargo ship, every handshake between business leaders now seemed fraught with uncertainty. Tearing these economic ties apart was proving not only painful, but extraordinarily costly. Economists warned of long-term consequences, and business leaders on both sides of the Pacific braced for more turbulence ahead. The fallout from the Boeing-China clash sent shockwaves through the global aviation industry, reverberating far beyond the United States and China. Chinese airlines, once reliant on a steady stream of new Boeing jets, now faced major disruption: aging fleets, rising maintenance costs, and shrinking route networks. The uncertainty forced them to reconsider expansion plans and scramble for alternatives. Across the Atlantic, Airbus, Boeing's European rival, saw a surge in interest from Chinese carriers and other global airlines seeking to diversify their suppliers. But Airbus couldn't fill the gap overnight. Its own production lines were already stretched, and delivery backlogs grew longer. The void created a strategic opening for China's own jetmaker, COMAC. The C919, China's answer to the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320, became a symbol of national ambition. Yet the C919 still depended heavily on Western engines and avionics, making true independence elusive. If China truly cut off US parts, its own aviation dreams could stall, leaving factories idle and airlines grounded. The trade war forced a painful rethinking of global supply chains. What was once a seamless, efficient network now became a web of uncertainty, as companies worldwide scrambled to secure critical parts and reroute logistics. International airlines from Europe to the Middle East, Africa to South America watched nervously. Some hoped to benefit from faster deliveries as Chinese demand dropped, but most faced delays, higher prices, and a planning nightmare as the market grew unpredictable. The chaos threatened to slow the growth of air travel worldwide. Airports in Asia, Europe, and the Americas saw fewer new routes and less traffic, as airlines hesitated to invest in uncertain times. For decades, aviation thrived on predictability and global cooperation. International partnerships, joint ventures, and shared technology fueled the industry's rise, connecting people and economies across continents. Now the industry faced a future defined by fragmentation and risk. Airlines and manufacturers began to regionalize supply chains, and route maps grew more complex and less connected. The Boeing-China standoff was a warning to all. No market, no partnership, and no supply chain was truly safe. Around the world, business travelers, airline executives, and governments braced for a new era of uncertainty in the skies. This trade war is more than a business dispute, it's a seismic shift in global power. By targeting Boeing, China signaled that no U.S. company is immune from geopolitical retaliation. This move underscores the strategic importance of aerospace in national security and economic influence. International business now means navigating not just market risk, but superpower rivalry. Companies must weigh the political climate as heavily as financial forecasts. Investment is chilling, as billion-dollar contracts suddenly look fragile. The uncertainty is causing investors to rethink their strategies, pulling back from sectors vulnerable to geopolitical tensions. Nations and corporations are being forced to pick sides, fracturing the global market along political lines. This division is reshaping alliances and economic partnerships worldwide. The dream of a single, open market is fading, replaced by economic blocs and competing standards. The era of globalization is being challenged by a new wave of protectionism and national interest. Supply chain disruptions are spreading beyond aviation, as companies scramble to diversify away from China. This realignment is causing delays and increased costs across multiple industries. Boeing faces the costly task of reassigning jets custom-built for Chinese airlines, eroding trust with global customers. The ripple effects are felt across the aviation industry, impacting schedules and financial stability. If politics can upend deliveries overnight, how can any airline plan for the future? The unpredictability is forcing airlines to adopt more flexible and resilient strategies. The crisis is a stark reminder. In aviation, trust is as valuable as technology. Building and maintaining that trust is now more critical than ever in a world where geopolitical tremors can shake the foundations of global commerce. What comes next for the global aviation industry as the world watches the standoff between China and Boeing unfold? The future is uncertain, but several possible paths are emerging, each with profound consequences for airlines, manufacturers, and economies worldwide. In the best-case scenario, both sides return to the negotiating table. A deal is struck, tariffs are lowered, and Boeing deliveries to China resume, restoring a vital link in the global supply chain. Yet deep mistrust and political tensions make a quick fix unlikely. Even if talks restart, progress will be slow and fragile, with each side wary of giving too much ground. If negotiations stall or collapse, Boeing faces a stark reality. The company must accelerate its pivot to new markets: India, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, regions with growing demand for air travel. Boeing may even consider localizing production in these countries to sidestep tariffs and political risk. Meanwhile, China is unlikely to wait. The government will double down on building a self-sufficient aviation industry, pouring resources into COMAC and other domestic players, determined to break free from Western technology and create a homegrown rival to Boeing and Airbus. In response, the U.S. government may step in with subsidies, export credits, or new trade alliances to support Boeing and its vast network of suppliers, aiming to preserve American leadership in aerospace. This clash is more than a business dispute. It's a defining moment for global commerce. The lines between economics and politics are blurring, and every move is watched by markets and governments alike. The outcome of this standoff will set the rules for a new era of superpower competition, shaping the future of trade, technology, and international cooperation. Will this new era be defined by collaboration and shared progress, or by rivalry and division? The answer remains uncertain. One thing is clear: the jets may have left China, but the turbulence shaking the world's aviation industry is far from over. The next chapter is just beginning. As the dust settles on the initial confrontation between Boeing and China, the shockwaves continue to ripple through the global aviation industry. Years from now, the after-effects of this trade war will be impossible to ignore. Airlines worldwide are rethinking their fleet strategies, wary of over-reliance on any single supplier or country. Diversification becomes the new mantra, not just for aircraft purchases but for parts, maintenance, and even pilot training. For manufacturers, the era of easy globalization is over. Supply chains, once optimized for efficiency, are now being rebuilt for resilience. Companies are investing in regional hubs, stockpiling critical components, and forging new alliances to guard against future disruptions. The dream of seamless international cooperation in aviation is replaced by a patchwork of localized partnerships and competing standards. Emerging players like COMAC gradually gain ground, benefiting from government backing and a captive domestic market. As their technology matures, they start to challenge the duopoly of Boeing and Airbus, not just in China, but across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Meanwhile, established giants are forced to innovate faster, pushing the boundaries of aircraft design, sustainability, and digital integration to maintain their edge. Passengers, too, feel the impact. Airfares fluctuate as airlines pass on the costs of uncertainty. Routes shift, with new connections opening in unexpected places and old ones disappearing. The experience of international travel becomes less predictable, shaped by the ebb and flow of geopolitics as much as market demand. In the end, the trade war between Boeing and China leaves a legacy of caution, and a world where the skies are more contested than ever. The age of aviation dominance by a handful of Western firms is giving way to a more fragmented, multipolar future. For airlines, manufacturers, and travelers alike, navigating this new landscape will require adaptability, foresight, and a willingness to weather even the fiercest storms. As we look back on the seismic shifts triggered by the Boeing-China trade war, one message is clear. The aviation industry has entered uncharted airspace. The lessons learned are as vital as the events themselves. Diversification and resilience are now at the core of every boardroom discussion, while innovation, both technological and strategic, has become the ticket to survival. For airlines, the days of single-source dependency are over. Expect to see deeper, more creative partnerships across continents, and a renewed focus on building flexible, robust fleets. Manufacturers will double down on R&D, racing to deliver not only safer and more efficient aircraft, but also greener and smarter ones, as climate concerns and digital transformation reshape the industry's priorities. Travelers, too, will notice the difference. While some routes may vanish and others emerge, the journey itself will evolve. Faster check-ins, smarter cabins, and perhaps even new types of aircraft crisscrossing our skies. Yet, unpredictability will remain a constant companion, as politics and policy continue to shape the flow of global air travel. So, what lies ahead? Experts predict a multipolar aviation world with emerging players rising alongside the old guard. The race for sustainable flight will intensify, and digital innovation will redefine how we experience the sky. Amidst all this change, one thing is certain: the spirit of flight endures, adapting and soaring above every challenge. The future of aviation will be written by those bold enough to embrace uncertainty, and visionary enough to turn turbulence into opportunity. Buckle up, the next chapter of flight is just beginning.